Tom from the Underwater Photography Guide and Blue Water Photo. Now today I'm here in my newest studio that I've designed for you guys because I got a little bit tired of you guys seeing my living room. So this is what I put together. It's a work in progress. It will get better and I'll figure out some cool new things to do with it. But here we go. That's not important because today this is the Nikon Z50 II review. This is Nikon's newest APS-C cropped mirrorless camera, and I'm super excited and stoked about the camera because I just got back from diving for 3 weeks in Anilao, Philippines, one of the best macro dive destinations in the world, on one of our blue water travel workshops, shooting with the camera. And I finally think we might have a Nikon D500 replacement, and I'll explain why in this video. But before I do, please make sure you like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel. It really gets our content out there. This is going to be a very interesting video, and I want people to see this and really understand what it means for Nikon shooters who might have been holding off from jumping to mirrorless that have really been happy with their D500 cameras. So let's get into this. This is the Nikon Z50 II. It clocks in at 1 pound 3 ounces, so it's very small. It works with Z mount lenses, but you can actually use an FTZ adapter to use F mount lenses. It has a 20 megapixel sensor. I know that's not the highest resolution, but it's still excellent in today's market. It can shoot 11 frames per second burst shooting with raw photos and 30 frames per second with JPEG, which is insanely fast, but that's what you get from a mirrorless camera. It has Nikon's newest autofocus system from the Nikon Z8 and Nikon Z9, the professional autofocus system that's been handed down, so that's really, really awesome. You can check out my reviews of those cameras. And it does 4K video up to 60 frames per second with a 1.4 times crop, or 4K 30 frames per second video. So it's a powerhouse of a camera, and I wanted to talk about my experience shooting with it in Anilao. Again, one of the best macro dive destinations in the world. You can see that from my photos, you can see that from the videos. So if you want to book a trip with us, reach out to us at info@bluewaterdivetravel.com or trips@bluewaterdivetravel.com if you want to get on our next workshop. But I'm going to get into this review and I'll show you some of the underwater systems that we have as well as what this camera can do. So this is the Ikelite Nikon Z50 housing. Now you can see it's one of Ikelite's actually larger DL systems, so it's the dry lock system. It's used mostly for full frame cameras, but sometimes when you have a crop sensor camera, you've got slightly larger lens and it can't fit into the dry lock micro housings that Ikelite makes. Now that can be a downside because it is more heavy to travel with, but at the same time, because there's a little bit more airspace, it's very light in the water, and my camera is almost neutral without using any floats. So that was pretty cool. Now, when I was shooting with it, I had a Nikon Z105 macro lens. And the reason I'm so excited about this setup is because the Z105 macro I find is about, I'd say, I mean, you can't put a number to it, but 1.5 times sharper than the F-mount 105 macro. And when it initially came out, I wasn't super excited about this lens. The autofocus was very slow, which I found a little bit problematic on the first initial Nikon Z cameras. But as I said, the autofocus system in this camera has been updated from the Z8 and Z9, and now the autofocus is excellent. And so you have an excellent autofocus system with a sharper lens. That makes this camera, especially with the crop factor that you have on here, a huge upgrade from the Nikon Z50. And the autofocus upgrade is really why I think this should be at the top of people's minds if they're considering upgrade from the D500. Now, that's going to be an unpopular opinion. A lot of people on the internet right now are saying, well, this camera is not a Nikon Z6 III, it's not a Nikon D500, but a lot of those reasons don't really matter for underwater photographers. There have been complaints about there being no vertical battery grip. Well, for underwater photography, you want to have a small camera that you can put inside of a housing, you don't need that grip. There's also been complaints about weather sealing and a few other things that really are just not super applicable to underwater photography. What's important is the autofocus system. So what's so cool about the Nikon Z50 II autofocus system is you have autofocus tracking, which allows you to use the 3D tracking Nikon's newest system where you can press your autofocus button, lock onto your subject, and it'll follow it around. But what I was so impressed with the Z50 II is I felt that even better than my Nikon Z8, this was able to actually acquire fisheyes when I was shooting underwater. And so far it's been the best camera on the market that I've tested that's been able to find and track fisheyes or animal eyes underwater while I've been shooting. Now granted, I was shooting with a macro lens the whole time, and it's a lot easier to find fisheyes when you're in that macro field of view. but it was doing a great job of it, and I found that for macro photography, I did not have to worry about autofocus the whole time I was shooting. I got great images, image after image after image, and my hit rate was like 90-95% with the autofocus tracking mode. I was super impressed. I got these photos of cuttlefish that were hunting. I got their tentacles up. I got interesting shots of gobies that normally would be jumping around, and this camera was not struggling at all with autofocus. I felt like I was shooting with my Nikon Z8, but I had a little bit more crop factor to get a little bit deeper into my macro shots, and that was really cool. So for macro photographers that want a sub $1,000 camera, I forgot to mention this is a $910 camera, it's an incredible value. Now, when it came to low light autofocus, I was not as impressed as the specs on the spec sheet say. So apparently the Nikon Z50 II is able to do low light autofocus down to -9 EV. I didn't really find that to be the case. What didn't seem as good as my Nikon Z8 or Nikon Z6 III in low light. I had some focus lights. I was using the focus lights to make the autofocus quicker. So if you're in low light, don't rely on shooting it without a focus light. Get a Blue Water 1500 focus light, just put it right on top, and it'll focus a lot quicker. But I do want to show you guys, if I can, I don't know if I can make this work, the 3D autofocus tracking and just how sticky and effective it is. It's super cool. So I don't have a card in here, but let's go ahead and I'll do my best to show you if it can focus. So there's the 3D tracking point. I've got this little box here, and you can see I'm going to focus on this wire. It just sticks to the wire as I move around, and it really does that for, you know, all sorts of well, subjects. And if you don't hit it, if the box doesn't hit on your subject, if it recognizes the eye, it just jumps right to the eye, and it does a great job. So that's why I'm so stoked about this camera. It's really the autofocus system that I think finally kind of has advantages over the Nikon D500, especially because your focus points can be edge to edge. That's one of the huge benefits of a mirrorless camera, and I do think the Z50 is worth the upgrade for that reason. But if you're not a D500 shooter, you just want to know, okay, so what else is good about it? Well, I will say one of the cons is that there's no in-body image stabilization. So if you're a video shooter or you do a lot of cold water diving where you need to have low shutter speeds to get the green, hopefully blue light in there, it's not going to do the best job in the world at making sure that those images are sharp. Now that said, you've got strobes, you can freeze your subjects. I'm not too worried about not having in-body image stabilization, and even when I was shooting macro with these long lenses, it did a great job. I didn't have a problem. Now the other really cool feature about the Nikon Z50 II is video. It does amazing 4K 60 video. Now that does have a crop factor, so you are going to get a little bit more noise at higher ISOs. Not a problem if you have video lights like I was shooting in my videos. But also it can do N-log or Nikon logarithmic picture profiles, which allow you to get more details in your highlights and your shadows and edit your edit your videos a little bit more like editing a photo with a RAW file. It allows you to have a lot more control over your colors, over your white balance, and over your details, and you get much nicer video that way. This camera can also do HDR recording, or HLG, hybrid log gamma, which is really cool. So it's a little bit easier to edit than N-log, but still a great picture profile. And overall, it's a pretty solid video camera. It's not going to film forever though, because one of the cons again is the battery life. There's a new battery in here, and I want to talk about that briefly. It's a new battery, it's small, but I didn't like it. And the main reason I didn't like it is because it lasted about 2 dives, even when I was taking photos. 2 dives, you know, used to be kind of the standard for mirrorless cameras. I would say 2 dives is not the standard anymore. You do have to replace it more frequently. Thankfully on this Ikelite housing, I actually had a data transfer cable that could plug directly into the camera. So I never actually had to take the camera out of the housing. I could just plug it right in and start charging, which was awesome. So if you do get a housing for it, I do recommend the data transfer cable. It's so worth having, and it does a great job. So let's talk briefly about image quality. The Z50 II, like I mentioned, has a 20 megapixel sensor. It's the same sensor that's found on the Nikon D500, the Nikon Z50. So for the crop sensor Nikons, the sensor has not really changed. The image quality that you're going to get is about the same. So If you don't care about the autofocus benefits, it might not be worth upgrading from the D500. If you just care about image quality, the image quality is fantastic. It hasn't changed. It does great at high ISOs, not as great as obviously Nikon Z8 or especially Nikon Z50 II, but it does good. And finally, talking about the burst shooting, well, the Nikon Z50 II does have a slightly higher burst rate than the D500, but it's not noticeable enough, especially for underwater photography, to really make a difference. Now, if you do have a CNC YSD3 Mark II or an Ikelite DS230 strobe, or any of the other high-performance strobes like the Apollo 3 that can handle 10 frames a second shooting, great, you'll notice the difference at lower power on the strobe. But otherwise, you don't really have to worry about shooting quicker than that in most cases, unless you don't use strobes, you're a pelagic photographer, you want to shoot sailfins or sharks or dolphins. Well, yeah, maybe you could benefit from a full frame camera, but honestly, the Z50 II does great at 11 frames per second for shooting. So now I'm going to top off this review with just a short word on the housing options and the underwater lens options available for this camera. As I mentioned before, the Z50 II is really a macro camera for me. The crop factor is super beneficial for macro. You can get cropped in a little bit more on these full frame lenses. Now, granted, if you do go for a Z8, you can just crop your image on the Z8 because the resolution is so good. But it is a good macro camera. With that said, my favorite macro lens for this camera is the Z105. The F105 also works great, but I would recommend the Z105. It's just a bit sharper. For wide angle, another good lens is the Nikon 8-15 fisheye. It's not going to be the full circular fisheye that you see on a full frame camera. It's going to crop down a little bit, but you do have a little bit of zoom range because of that. Unfortunately, this camera won't work with the Tokina 10-17 and the FTZ adapter. At least the last time I tried it, it didn't work. I don't know if there's a firmware upgrade since then. So in the Ikelite housing, you can use any lens that you really want. That's one of the benefits of the Ikelite housing. So those would be my go-to lenses. There is a Nauticam Z50 II housing, and these are the only two housings. The Nauticam housing is an anodized aluminum housing. It's designed only for the kit lens, which is the 16-50 kit lens. So it's designed to be a little bit smaller just because it only has that kit lens, and it's designed to use Nauticam wet optics with that. So you have a little bit of versatility underwater, but if you want full range of lenses, I would go for the Ikelite option, which is great, made in America, so you don't have to worry about the tariff issues or price increases or anything like that. Now there's one final point that I wanted to make that I almost forgot about, which is with the APS-C lenses available for the Z50 II, there's not that many options. There's like 2 or 3 crop sensor lenses, so I tend to use a lot of full frame lenses on the Z50 II, which makes it larger, as you can see. That is one of the downsides of upgrading from a D500 if you're considering it for above water photography. But like I said, all this stuff is underwater based for us. So full frame lenses, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with carrying a little bit of extra glass in order to get the best image quality. But if you want to go for a crop sensor lens, the Nauticam also has that option there. So that's my full review of the Nikon Z50 II. I hope you guys enjoyed watching it. Again, please like this video and subscribe to our channel if you want to see more great content from us. If you want to support our content, we can get you set up with a full Ikelite Nikon Z50 II system like I was using in the Philippines, or Nauticam Z50 II system. And we're happy to give you recommendations for strobes, TTL options, which was also awesome using with this housing. We have the best sales team in the world, the most experienced sales team in the world, and definitely the friendliest sales team. So reach out to us at sales@bluewaterphotostore.com to get yourself set up. Thanks guys for watching, and we'll see you out there diving.